Parental alienation is the growing disease that's affecting all of us.
How is it possible to turn a child against his or her own parent? The idea itself seems preposterous. From an outside point of view, the idea of a child turning against a parent seems like that specific parent clearly did something worthy of anger and hatred. However, that's not always the case. The alienating parent portrays him or herself as the Almighty, capable of giving and taking. No child wants to see his or her parents split apart. So naturally, if a husband and wife walk away from each other, who is to say that if the relationship goes sour, the mother or father won't walk away from the child? And that is the realization the divorce creates for the child.
Hi, Andrew, and welcome to the Anti-Alienation Project. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Maddie. It's great to be here as well.
So, for people watching, you probably don't know, but about 2 years ago, when I first watched Ryan Thomas's video and had my aha moment, learned that I'd been through parental alienation. Directly after, there was a little suggested video on the side, which was Andrew from, I believe, about maybe 7 years ago. I don't know if that's.
I think that's accurate. Yeah, actually, now it might be almost 10 years ago, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a while.
You definitely looked younger in the video, and so I watched a video about parental alienation as I was figuring it out from you. Thank you. So about 10 years ago, I guess, you had the strength and courage to upload to YouTube.
Yeah, definitely. I was trying to find a way to communicate the things that I had experienced, but also communicate the challenges that I was having when I was alienated from my brother.
Yes, I saw some of that on your channel. I was rewatching your videos, like I said earlier today. But I just wanted to say thank you for doing that and for making those videos. You helped me learn what I was going through. When you reached out to me, I think over the summer, later in the summer maybe,
Yeah.
I saw your your name and your face. I was like, could that be? Parental alienation, such a small little world right now. So I was so excited to hear from you, and I'm excited to talk to you today. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So if you don't mind, could you please give people a little bit of your background? I know you don't want to go too much into your story, but if you could just get a little summary so people know who you are and how parental alienation has affected your life.
Yeah, sure thing. So name's Andrew Folkler. I was alienated from my mother for right about 13 years. It started when I was about 5 years old, and I reunited with her in, I think, Christmas of December 2013. And so I was about 18 years old at the time. I remember when the alienation started. It was shortly after the divorce. My dad was really pushing hard to get his career going, and one of the challenges that comes with that is, he needed to be at work more often to show up and be the kind of guy that would more likely get promoted, which means he needed to have someone to watch over myself and my younger brother. And he was very quick to get married. He found someone from and got married to her. She was a early childhood education specialist, so in his mind, who better to delegate the child raising efforts to while he's off trying to build his career. And unfortunately for him, he wasn't there to really see all the inner workings of alienation start to take place. And he would come home and see, well, Andrew and his brother are angry at their mom. Well, I'm angry at their mom, so it must be justified. And in his mind, uh he's just a lot, how would you say, validating the emotions that was being stirred within us. And over time, we became more and more hostile towards my mother. By the time I was about, I want to say like 8 or 9, we moved from Arizona to Michigan, putting pretty much the entire United States worth of distance between my mother and I. And then shortly after that, I think I was about 13, we moved from Michigan to Singapore, putting the entire planet between us. Throughout the entire 13-year period, I had only met my mother face to face once. That was around like 10 years old. We were living in Michigan at the time. She had drove up to Michigan to spend, I think she spent a whole week there with us, and then she had to go back home. So throughout the rest of that time, it was virtually no contact, save for maybe Christmas gifts and the occasional birthday gifts. It wasn't until I reached a point when my stepmother was divorcing my father. This is fast forwarding to about 2012, 2013. When that was happening, my stepmother at the time was starting to say things that sounded a little too familiar. And since I was old enough to know who my father was and I had a good relationship with him, it it struck me as odd that I was hearing all of these accusations about my father and I had never seen them. My last year, basically my senior year of school, I spent most of my time studying at home. So I was there to see most of the things that would happen at home. So to tell me, hey, there's all these things that happen while you're at school didn't make sense. It got to a point where I was stuck in in an unwinnable situation. My father needed medical attention in the United States, and we were witnessing the total collapse of the family unit again. And it is from there when we decided that the best decision would be to move back to the United States, and then that would be the end of it. We made that decision for a number of reasons. Firstly, my own livelihood at home was being threatened in the sense where I had a full ride engineering scholarship with monthly stipends that could have led me to an engineering career. But what ended up happening was my stepmother was demanding stipends to be given to her. Um, it's 800 Singapore dollars a month. That roughly translates to about 600 USD. I knew I wouldn't be safe if I stayed there. My father needed medical attention. We decided to move back to the United States. Right after that, of course, there's naturally a lot of drama that occurred after that. And in the process of blocking people on Facebook, I saw my mother's name and I decided, well, what the hell? I'm just going to unblock her. Nothing's going to come of it, right? And that's where I was wrong. Because right after, and I mean this, the day after, she messaged me asking me how was I doing, uh, if there was anything that she could do to help, and that I could always rely on her if I needed something. I have always been the dutiful son my life. And so when it came to the alienation process, I was always trying to set a good example. I guess a bad example. I was setting the example of I shouldn't talk to my mother. And for me, at that moment, all barriers I had just kind of shattered because I thought, if she is still going to reach out to me like this, even after all these years, what the hell? We'll just give her a shot. We'll see what happens. I thought, I'm old enough to make my decisions. No one's going to yell at me for talking to her anymore. So let's see what happens. And I the week of Christmas 2013, I decided to go see her, and it was an incredible experience. It gave me an opportunity to really see the other side of things that I didn't really understand. And from there, that's when I realized that everything that I had been told about my mother was completely false.
I have a few questions.
Yep.
Um, so if we go back to the beginning before your parents' divorce, if you can even remember back then, do you remember what your relationship was with your mom? What it was like before the alienation, before the divorce?
Yeah, I was close to my mom. It's hard to remember because I was about 5 years old. My mom was very giving. I know she was young at the time, and so like it was like being a mother is was a completely new experience for her, and she had a whole host of other challenges on top of being a new mother. Uh, but I do think that she was doing her best with what she had available to her, and so I guess the most I can really say is that I was close to her. I did enjoy being around her. I had a strong relationship with her.
Okay, I was just curious about that because that is one of the things I usually say with parental alienation is evidence of a close relationship before the alienation. So, when the alienation began, were you taken away from your mom instantaneously and it was instant no contact, or was that more of a prolonged period of time?
It was a slow decline, and then once the connection was severed, it was everything was done to maintain it. So initially in the court proceedings, it was 2 weeks of time with my mother in the summer, and that was pretty much it. Everything else was sole custody to my dad. Um, Partly because she didn't really have much of a career for herself, so just the idea of being able to stay with her just wasn't gonna fly in court.
Mm.
And so it put my mother in a difficult spot because she just didn't have the means to do so. Um, and so we spent a little bit of time with her right after the divorce, but if I remember correctly, we we moved out of Arizona shortly after my my mother and my my father and my stepmother got married.
Okay. I'm always so curious about these things now, with what we know, and then also having my own personal experience. As I learn things about these tactics, I can look back on my own life and identify certain things. And I was curious about it for you too. Like I learned recently that researchers have found that it takes about 30 days for a child under intense pressure and manipulation, 30 days of no contact with their targeted parent to completely lose hope and have the alienation solidified. I was going to ask you if that resonates with you at all.
It definitely does resonate. Considering that, when you're under that much pressure, it it triggers you into a state of survival mode, and in a way your ability to see the bigger picture diminishes because you're going to have this narrow focus on just staying out of trouble, staying out of any potential um, abusive behaviors that might be thrown at you. So I mean it'll vary amongst lots of kids. In my case, getting hit was something that happened. Getting yelled at was something that would happen often, as well as a lot of verbal insults, and none of that feels good. And as a kid, your only thoughts are like, how do I make sure I don't get punished again? How do I make sure I don't get yelled at again? And you just start developing these say processes, or you developing these behaviors, so that you'll do whatever it takes to not get in trouble again, because otherwise your entire sense of survival is threatened.
Absolutely. If you don't feel comfortable answering this, totally fine. I do just I'm curious, and I bet a lot of other people are curious. What was your attitude or feeling like toward your stepmom growing up? Did you have loving feelings toward her? Were you afraid of her, angry at her? How would you characterize that?
So often in a toxic relationship, uh, there's this huge polarity between being very, very sweet and nice and being very, very mean and toxic. And the that individual can switch back and forth really quickly. They'll it's almost like they beat you with a stick in 1 minute, and then the next minute they're I don't know, rubbing ointment on the wound and telling you that you can't be bad, you can't be bad, you gotta otherwise bad things will happen. And pretending like that, it's like a look what you made me do kind of game, you could say. As kids, of course, we don't fully understand the emotional complexity of that type of toxic relationship. And what ends up happening is we started looking up to her as our mother figure. I stopped calling my own mother mom when I was 5. I was calling her by her first name whenever she would call on the phone or something like that. And I would give my stepmother the title of mom. In my mind as a kid, it just felt like, oh, this random woman that my father married is this selfless, caring, heroic person who's going out of her way to take care of just a couple random kids. And I ended up putting her on a pedestal.
Mm. She put herself on a pedestal?
Course. I mean, like that in a way, like she has to set some sort of example, and then she would try and reinforce that so that it feels like it's our beliefs.
Absolutely. I was definitely made to believe it was all my beliefs too. Going back to when you got that message about from your mom on Facebook and you met up with her, I would love to know more about that if you're willing to talk about that, about what it was like to even put yourself out there to respond, or to challenge your beliefs, and then what it was like to see her and meet with her.
Yeah, absolutely. I will first put out this disclaimer by saying that everyone's going to react differently, based on number of circumstances. But for me, I have always been the get it done guy. I've always been I'm the oldest sibling, so like I'm in charge, I'm responsible for things. And the, there's a lot of pressure for like if something's not done correctly or if it's not um then I need to fix it. I need to take care of it because that's the right thing to do. So for my feelings when I realized the truth was the overwhelming sense of I am responsible for this.
Oh,
I have to do something about it.
yeah.
And in some ways that was incredibly beneficial because I didn't dissociate or avoid it. I didn't cower away or like try and pretend nothing happened. I took complete responsibility as much as I could on building a relationship with my mother that would it won't account for all the missing time. It won't make up for any of that, but I can at least give her something that she can hold on to so that as she lives out the rest of her life, she can go to sleep at night knowing, you know what, all that pain really sucked, but at least we managed to have something in the end. And I think that mindset has helped me a lot, but I can't say that other kids would have that mindset because everyone's different. Everyone handles these challenges differently. Um, but taking ownership has helped me a lot. Part of it is holding myself accountable. I'm not, and when I say that, I don't want to make it look like I spend my time, in a corner in the room saying, "Oh, I'm so guilty. I'm so stupid." No, I don't do that. But what I do is I say, "Okay, I have to fix this. I have to fix it and make it better, and I'm going to do whatever it takes." So that's kind of how I've approached it. And that's really the feeling I have. I still have that feeling often where I think about how I want to be the best son that my mother could have. If, whatever it takes and whatever that looks like, on different day-to-day basis, I'm going to push hard for that.
That's so beautiful. I feel a similar way. And do you think that part of that feeling of wanting to make things right and take responsibility and enact change is what made you want to go public in some way or try to help other people who've been through this?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it's cathartic in some ways. It gives me an opportunity to uh, one, validate the experiences of other people and help explain that this is a ongoing issue within our within the modern society. And also it's a way of pursuing indirect justice for my mother. At least that's how I've interpreted it. Obviously, I mean, I'm not crusading for her with her name on a signboard or anything like that, but the idea of like, okay, she suffered from this. I can at least help other parents and at least make this experience valuable to somebody.
Absolutely. I love that. I respect that so much. If you don't mind, can we go back a little bit? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like what I've gathered from knowing you and hearing your story is that it was when your stepmom attempted to alienate you from your dad that you were able to see the truth. Is that right?
That is correct.
Do you have any distinct memories or moments when you actually put two and two together? What was that like in your head? Or how did it happen that you realized, oh, she's trying to turn me against my dad? And then was it immediately that you thought maybe she did this with my mom, or was it a process?
The thoughts of she did this with my mom came a lot later. Growing up with her, I always knew that she had a thing for embellishing the truth. And so with that filter, she says something extreme. I might say, okay, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, and then just move on with my life. And then as things got more and more heated, then the accusations got more and more crazy. My dad has multiple sclerosis. It affects everything in his body, from the way he walks and his eyesight and all of that. And so when he's taking medication for that, one example would be sleeping pills, because insomnia is a common side effect of MS. She would say something along the lines of, "Your dad's a drug addict."
Mm.
And so as a you know maybe, how'd you say it? Let me rephrase that. When you hear something like that, an accusation like that, it's pure shock value. It's like, it's like a slasher movie, where you watch it and it scares you for the first time, but then after you watch it again, you realize, oh, this is all fake. So shock value is one of the core things that the stepmother would use. So once you reach a point where you realize, okay, hold up, these are just big scary things that she's throwing at me, that um and I know what those things, I know what a drug addict looks like. I know what an alcoholic looks like. And I would compare that with who my father was and who I knew him to be. A man who drinks one beer or two beers at night and an alcoholic are two very different people. But the thing is, when you're being told, especially when you're on the outside, and you hear, oh, this person is all of these terrible things, and they just go line by line, and then it just makes you think, holy shit, do I really know this person? And the thing is, since I have been close to my father, I was able to really kind of pick that apart. And the other thing that contributed to my decision to leave was the things that she would say about herself were not in line with her actions.
Yes.
Um, so, I mean, like, she was having an affair. It was an open thing. Everybody saw it. And it was one of those things where, like, I was actively working with her affair buddy to to do things that were either career related or even just regular religious stuff or social related stuff. Point being that I got a lot more involved in that divorce than I did in the first time. And that was part of my, you could say, overcorrection behavior, because being 5 and helpless was something that I didn't want to feel again. And so I would rather be 18 and try to be, stick my fingers in my nose into everything. And from there, I was able to, you could say, play detective and try and figure out what's actually going on in the divorce, because I had a lot of adults telling me things that my stepmother was saying, and they were just so extreme, and none of it made sense.
So you had some social reinforcement outside of what your stepmother was telling you?
Yeah, I mean, my stepmother's daughter and was kind of like stepmother 2.0.
Boy, this is all sounding very familiar to me.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, let's take a sip. Let's drink.
yeah, yep.
Okay. I know we're gonna have some people watch this video who have been alienated from their parents, and they might still be too scared to make that first step to reach out. I'd like to keep that in mind if we could. I would like to hear your perspective, anything you've learned. It's such an overwhelming process and scary, at least it was for me, that I can understand why some people would be too scared to make that first step. How did that go for you, and what would you tell other people who are debating whether or not to reconnect with that parent?
So let's say you want to reconnect with your alienated parent, but you don't know how, you don't know what's possible for you. I think the first thing that comes to mind is you need to make sure that you have some level of independence and are not relying on the parent that's alienating you. Because the hard reality is if they have any leverage over you, whether that's, the financial leverage, or you're living in their home, or whatever, they will use that against you. They will blackmail you. They will tell you things like, I will take away, I don't know, your allowance, I'll take away whatever. And without that independence, you can't even set your own boundaries, because your boundaries don't exist with them. It's just not feasible at all. So what made it possible for me to reunite was, I mean, a combination of multiple things, but a huge factor was the fact that I got away. Um, because like if I stayed there, even even in the same city, it would have been very difficult for me to make that jump. When I left that home with my father and we came back to the United States, I knew this was it. I can't. There's no going back. It's burning the boats behind me. Like, we're done. Um, and so from there, I had to be my own person. I can't allow someone else to live my life for them. Um, and so with all of that said, like, really, it's none of it's possible without some level of independence, because a lot of parents I talk to, their kids are either in college or they're late high school, and they're hoping that, oh, maybe if the kid's a little older, they'll have some sense of wanting to connect. And I don't think the parent is quite grasping that the kid probably still can't. Aside from the fact that the abuse can leave you uh, farther behind in terms of emotional development. The abuse can also get you rooted in, you could say, certain behaviors and or behavioral patterns that are preventing you from growing. And part of that growth is reconnecting with you. And it's so hard to do that when your whole life you've trained yourself to say, I can't talk to this parent, and then all of a sudden you're going to flip a switch and pretend that all of that programming is not relevant anymore. That's really hard. You need to be in a place where the environment changes. um, I'm going to quote Atomic Habits by James Clear. I don't know if it, one of the core things that especially in addictions, is that environment can really help shape who you are as a person. And one of the best ways to change who you are is to change your environment. Which is why one of the bigger challenges for those who are addicted to drugs, especially, is if they go to rehab, they're in a different environment temporarily, then they get out of rehab and they're released back in their home environment where all the current triggers are that may provoke them into relapsing. Now imagine if we just replace drugs with alienation. Same concept, everything works the same. They they go they're in their alienator's home, and they have an identity they have to wear. That identity is the dutiful child, the golden child, the whatever child, um, and the idea is that they have to be that person, and that persona has been built by the alienating parent,
Yeah.
and they can't leave that persona behind until they get away from that environment.
I'm so glad you said that because I agree 100%. I don't know if I told you this. I think you know, I moved across the country a year ago. Like I figured it out, 6 months later, bye. We moved across the country. So I'm 100% with you, not only in my personal life, I also did a bunch of research on this before we moved about environments and everything like that. So I know that you're right about that. You kept mentioning persona, which made me think about something. And I've heard people argue about this, but since we've actually lived through the alienation as children, teens, young adults, I think it might be interesting if we could touch on this for a minute. And that is the topic of parental alienation being a form of a cult. So you were mentioning persona and the persona the alienator built in the child, and it made me think of the alienation being like a cult. And that if we use that metaphor, the targeted parents and the experts are trying to talk about a cult they've never been part of. We've been part of that cult. We can expose that cult. We know how it operates. We were part of it. And with that being said, I don't know if you heard the bite model, but how cults, I read a book about cults by Dr. Hassan. And it's called Freedom of Mind. And he talks about the bite model, which is how cult leaders indoctrinate cult members. And I wonder if this would resonate with you. So he talks about how basically what they have to control in order to indoctrinate and use mind control on the cult members is to control four things. It's the acronym BITE: behaviors, information, thoughts, and emotions. And I wonder if we could talk about that, having been inside of this cult. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And the because a lot of the behaviors are trained based on whatever disciplinary methods the alienating parent takes. Mine resorted to a lot of hitting, uh, verbal abuse and gaslighting, and so I had to learn very quickly, um, to learn what cues she had, so that I could avoid getting hit, or I could avoid getting yelled at. And all of that. Now, obviously, I mean, there's a whole lot of different cults, and so maybe they might operate to varying degrees. At least within my own experience, I can just say that all four of all four of those things were deeply controlled within me, and I didn't even realize it because in my mind, I always just thought, okay, well, this is what happens when I'm bad. This is what happens when I'm good. You get rewarded for being a compliant child, and you get punished for doing something that might seem insignificant to everyone else.
Absolutely. I assume you have no contact with your stepmom. Yeah, since you have moved and reconnected with your mom and rebuilt yourself and your identity and gotten away from that abuse, how have you noticed your life change and yourself change, your view of the world and yourself, if at all?
I think one of the first things I felt was a great sense of freedom. I can do what I want, in the sense of like pursue things that matter to me. Um, I tried hard to when I was older to try and do things that I was interested in, especially once I hit those teenage years, because that's those are the years where hormonally you're the most rebellious, you're trying to express yourself and trying to figure out who you are. Um, and so like I remember leading up to leaving. So we'll just say from 16 to 18, those are the years where like I'm trying to become a young adult, and I'm trying to become at least a good man. And I remember choosing not to date because I knew that if I did, I would put some random girl that I would care about and in harm's way, because I knew that she my stepmother would probably do something to hurt her, and I wouldn't know what, and I'd feel guilty about that. It was something that happened. I was my first girlfriend and I broke up in 2 weeks, not because of a failure within the relationship, but because I was told either you break up with her or I will hurt her. And in my mind, like I just didn't know what to do about that. It's like, what do you do? Once I got out of that environment, there's the freedom to really tell myself, okay, I can do the things that I'm meant to do. I can do the things that everyone does in a normal world. Whether it's pursue a career that I'm actually interested in, or find a partner that would support me and build a good life with me, or build a family that on my terms. All of those things were not possible before when I was living with her. But once I got out, I was able to slowly figure that out for myself. Sure, it took me a little longer than maybe other people might have, because I had to start from I had a kind of a late start to all of that, and that's okay. But I wasn't able to start until I got away, and I think that was probably the biggest victory for myself once I got out. I remember growing up getting yelled at for reading Harry Potter. Harry Potter was the craze back then. And, and the thing was like, well, I was told like, "Oh, you're reading all these big books. Do you even understand books?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah. I mean, that's why I'm reading. You want me to read more? Why can't I read the books that I think are interesting?" And and so it's like the issue was like I didn't even have the freedom to choose my own books. Like it was just it's so wild. And now I have that free. I have a whole library upstairs, and I'm proud of that library. I built that library myself, and that library would not be possible if I was still living with her. And in a way, that library is symbolic of everything else in my life: the family that I'm building, the life that I'm building, the career I'm building, all of those things that are just basic components to the average human, the average modern human. Those things are so severely restricted because you have to find a career that would make the alienating parent look good. You would have to pursue activities that would make them look good. And you end up being a trophy child.
Shell of yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you so, so much for saying all of that. I mean, not only is this helpful for other people to hear that are going to watch this episode, but I mean, thank you for me, because all of that is what I went through. So, Andrew, I know that you've been working with targeted parents, Ginger, Gentile, and the Erasing Family. I'm sure that you've been helping a lot of people. So, I would love to hear some action items that you have for parents, or any types of advice, tips, things that you've learned that might be helpful for parents listening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most beneficial things I've done for myself, in terms of recovering from the pain of the experience, but also to connect with my brother, who I was alienated from for a while, was instead of focusing on the science, instead of focusing on the theory, I would focus on things that are more practical within your life. And what I would suggest, in fact, would be things like personal development related things, anywhere from communication skills, leadership skills, anything to help you build your self esteem and self awareness, All of those things are far more powerful, in my opinion, than knowing the difference between, all these different theories or all the different schools of thought and alienation. You know, we've gone a long way now since the 70s when, you had Richard Gardner coming out with parental alienation syndrome, and now all of a sudden we're dropping the syndrome. And, people there was a petition way back in like 2014, 2015 to get parental alienation in the DSM-5. Didn't happen. Dr. Childers comes out, says something else is already in there, and it's just like none of that matters.
Mm.
None it doesn't matter what flavor of narcissism your ex is out of the picture, and hopefully they stay out of the picture. Focus on what matters, and what matters right now is building a meaningful relationship with your kid. And I know that's really hard, and sometimes that you might hear that and say, well, I can't even talk to my kids, what do I do? And it's one of those things where I would say you really have to look at how can you build yourself up first, build a home that would be welcoming enough for your kid, because until you do that, what's going to happen is you're going to have this awkward conversation with your kid, and then they're going to go away again, and you're going to be wondering like, how do I reach out to them? A lot of parents talk about wanting to reconnect, and they try and create this conversation of, hey, let's let's reconnect, let's talk. And I think that's just so detrimental, because the problem is reconnect doesn't mean anything. What's reconnect? If you already reconnected, if you already had your relationship with your kid, you would be, quote, reconnected. What would you be doing? And so let's skip the reconnect part. Let's skip the reconnect conversation and like go straight to doing things that connected parents would do with their kids.
Mm.
And if your kid shuts you down, if your kid says, no, I'm not doing that, no, I don't want you in my life, try something else. And you just keep trying and just keep throwing out these different ideas. There's a quote by Zig Ziglar. He's a business development expert. And he said, everyone's favorite radio station is WIIFM. What's in it for me? So the hard reality is your kid's not going to talk to you unless you are coming out from the mindset of, how do I do something for you? How do I do something for them as a kid? And it's not like from the parent side of the things of like, oh, how do I do what I think is best for you? Because they're going to shut you down regardless. But if you can look at opportunities and things that would matter to them, and again, it's going to vary among different parents. Some parents might not even have contact at all, and you're going to have it's even harder for them. But whatever details you can get about your kid's life, you try and play detective, and then you try and figure out what's valuable to them, and then you make an offer. If your offer is valuable to them and they accept it, boom, you're in. You can try and build your relationship with them. Again, skipping the emotional talk, skipping the talk of like, we should spend more time together, we should talk more, I wish we could go back to like we used to, because
Mhm.
that doesn't quite resonate with them. But for example, there was a parent I spoke to where his daughter was getting married, and he was saying, well, I was thinking of talking to her fiance about building a better relationship with them. I was like, why not skip that and just say, hey, I'd like to help you with your wedding. That sounds like it will get you a yes. You say, "Hey, I'd like to stay connected." They're gonna be like, "Look, I've got a wedding to plan for. I don't really have time for this. You haven't been around all this time." Versus, "Hey, I need help. I can help with the wedding. What do you need help with? I'll chip in." And then they'll be like, "Well, shit, can't say no to free stuff." And in their mind, they think they're getting the better bargain without even realizing that that's what's setting the foundation for you to build that relationship that you have always wanted.
Excellent advice. Excellent advice. I think that the talk about let's reconnect, let's rehash the past, let's have this moment can also have a lot of pressure, can put a lot of pressure on the kid in an already high pressure environment. I have a lot of
Yeah.
thoughts on reunification therapy. personally because I was made to do therapy with my dad when I was young in a group therapy setting. And it did nothing for our relationship, but probably made things worse. And I think it would be much more beneficial for parents to take their child out and do something fun, new, exciting, an activity that they will both remember and have their serotonin and endorphins go up. And I mean, hell, if all you have is a reunification therapy appointment, like I think it would be better. I wonder what your thoughts are on this, but I think it might even be more helpful to bring in the child's favorite board game and play a game than to talk about
One
issues that don't really
100%.
exist.
Yeah, 100% agree. Most people have this feeling of, I don't want to talk to a therapist. There's a lot of stigmas with it, and of course, I'm not bashing therapy, but it's along the lines of there's that feeling of like we got this stranger sitting in here listening to being paid to listen to our problems. Why are we doing this? And again, stigma. So I don't cancel me, but the uh I think like you said, playing a board game is so much more powerful. Like to use the analogy of dating a lot. When you're dating, you never jump to the big yes first. You never. When I met my wife, I did not walk up to her and say, "Hi, my name's Andrew. Let's get married." Because imagine, like, what would that look like? And then you can imagine Andrew getting slapped. It wouldn't work out. It just wouldn't work out. And if it did, then I'm in trouble. But uh, the jokes aside, when you're dating, you start with small commitments, right? Maybe, can I get your phone number? Maybe it's, let's go meet for coffee. Let's walk in the park. Let's watch a movie together. And then, after those small commitments, then you're like, okay, we can do small stuff together. Maybe we'll do something bigger. Let's do a really nice dinner, or let's stay overnight at each other's houses or something like that. And then you move up to the next level. I don't know, let's meet our parents or whatever. And you slowly work your way up, because if you can achieve a small yes, then that's huge progress for you, because that increases your likelihood of getting the next yes. And your goal is to create a trail of small yeses that slowly accumulate to the big yes. The big yes is to reconnect with you. But again, like I was saying earlier, we're not going to say let's reconnect. You're just building the journey of reconnecting by doing these small micro commitments. And it could be as small as sending a meme to your kid. Or I guess if you are technically savvy and willing to go on TikTok, you could send, I don't know, videos or whatever to your kid. Hey, I saw this, thought it was funny, thought you might like it. If, let's just say, for example, using the meme example, hey, I saw this, thought you might like it. If they don't like it, if they don't respond, your world's not going to be shattered. No one's going to care if they thought the meme was a dud. But that's okay. You just try again. You try something else. Or maybe, for example, if your kid plays video games, you offer to play with them. You don't have to be good. You don't have to be on the leaderboard. You just have to have fun with them. You just have to show enough passion and interest that matches theirs. And then they're going to be more likely to say, hey, you know what? You're not that bad of a guy.
I love that. Sounds like you're encouraging parents maybe to meet their child where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great advice. Great advice. I don't want to take up too much of your night, but I do have two more questions for you.
All right, hit me.
Okay. So the first one is, what do you think are maybe the top one or two misconceptions that people have about alienated children?
Sections. Well, I think the obvious one, the first obvious one would be the idea that once a kid's older, they'll come back to you.
Mhm.
Because that's not entirely true. There are some things that will play in your favor. For example, when a kid, I think neurologically speaking, women's prefrontal cortex fully develops around the times between ages 21 and 23, and for men it's about 25. And the prefrontal cortex is the part that manages our ability to navigate emotional complexity. So when that's developed, you're more likely to be able to notice manipulation. You're more likely to notice the nuances of the adult world that we live in today. But again, that's no guarantee. That doesn't mean that your kid is going to, their brain's going to develop, and one day they're going to realize, oh my God, I have been screwed over. It's not going to happen like that. And it also doesn't guarantee that their brain is fully developed, considering that the trauma and high cortisol levels throughout their life diminishes the size of your prefrontal cortex. And I think it also affects other parts of the brain. So I don't want to say facts that I'm not 100% sure of, but the fact is that between the learned and programmed behaviors, those are a lot stronger than your brain development. So that's one part. The other part is that sometimes kids, when they reach that adult age, they still have ties to their alienating parent, even though they might be living in a different household, trying to manage themselves. And those ties still act as a barrier to them reconnecting with you, because maybe there's some sort of leverage that parent has over them. Again, it could be financial, it could be social, it could be this emotional obligation that they might have had cultivated throughout their childhood. So there's no guarantee that a kid will reunite with their alienated parent. Really, the only way, at least I can see that happening, is when that parent is consistently trying to reconnect with them, and the kid has to reach a point where they realize that they have to set very strict boundaries with the alienating parent.
That's a good point. I've spoken to a lot of former alienated children now, and it seems as though alienators are most of the time intent on sabotaging the reconnection between the targeted parent and the adult child, unfortunately. Last question. I know that learning the truth is traumatic. It was for me. I'm sure it has a different effect on every individual. Do you believe it's important for alienated kids to learn the truth, and why?
Absolutely. I mean, otherwise you're never going to live your life. You're going to live the life of a shell of a person. There is a person I met once who was alienated and also had other challenges in her life. And it was, I think about her a lot, because it's just a heartbreaking story, because I guess it's one of those things where you realize, in another universe that could have been me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's I don't want to give details about her life, because I want to preserve her anonymity. But the hard reality is that, you can't live your life if you're under someone else's thumb. You can't live your life. You can't be the person you could be. You can't live up to your potential if you are trapped underneath the layers of trauma and abuse and learned behaviors and all of that stuff. And you can't provide a meaningful life for any kids that you have in the future either, because you will be projecting whatever inner turmoil within yourself onto them, and however that may manifest. I mean, I don't want to push the myth that alienated kids lead to alienating parents, because I don't believe that's true. But what I will say is that the pain will manifest in its own way, and if that kid is not able to really heal the wounds that were dealt to them spiritually, psychologically, and emotionally, maybe even physically, if they're not able to address those wounds, then you're going to build a worldview that's trapped in survival mode. And when you're trapped in survival mode, you can't act normal because you're constantly afraid of things that might not even be there. And that's not to blame the victim, because it's not the victim's fault. It's the fact that they're perceiving threats when maybe there's not threats, or or the opposite might be true, where they're not seeing a threat when there is one. And you might react in ways that are detrimental to yourself, detrimental to your relationships, and over time, that chronic stress, that chronic pain will just lead you to a miserable life. And you can't, I mean, that's not a life worth living. Once you get out, once you reach a point where you realize the truth and you're able to say, I can stand on my own 2 feet without anybody else, like without anybody else trying to push me down, that is a very empowering feeling. And then you can start building your tribe, your people who genuinely love you, genuinely want to be a part of your life and want to be connected to you. And then those people will help lift you up another level. Because you got to be able to stand up on your 2 feet first, and then after that, then you're able to actually build your community. And you need both. I mean, you need to know who you are. You need to know who your people are. And I think that the biggest problem is that the alienating parent tries to give their alienated child both. And they try to maintain this. It's almost like you've got this, I don't know, reverse Peter Pan effect, where the kid is being pushed to stay a kid their whole life by the parent. I don't know if there's a better story for that, but that was the first words that came to mind.
That really resonates with me a lot. They definitely want the child, at least from what I'm aware of, to be dependent on them and not leave. Not I think it's rooted in insecurity and fear of abandonment. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Thank you for your work throughout the years and currently. It's been great to connect. It really has been. And I hope that we can continue to do episodes in the future. I know that people are gonna love hearing all of this because you've offered a lot of insight, but then also, like you said, action steps that parents can take. I think that as we come together and we amplify our voices, people will start to take this seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the hard reality is there's so many people out there that know what alienation is. They just don't know the word. They don't know that it exists as a behavioral pattern. And I've talked to a lot of people where things just kind of meandered their way into this part of my life. And then they're like, oh, yeah, you know what? I actually had something like that happen. Maybe it wasn't as extreme as you, but then they'd go down that line. It's a lot more prevalent than most people think.
Oh yeah. I mean, whenever I talk about it with people, they're aware of the phenomenon and usually they know somebody in their personal life who's been through it, if not their own experience and their own family members. Thank you so much, Andrew. I'm sure that some parents are going to be wondering how they can contact you or how they can follow along in your endeavors and your work. Is there one social media platform you prefer?
Facebook's probably the easiest to reach me. I mean, you can find me basically at Andrew Folkler on almost everything. But I'm around for a guest speaking and stuff like that. I just don't do as much as I used to.
Well, thank you so much for giving me your time tonight. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge, and thanks for, speaking out and having the courage to do that. It's not easy. I really admire you for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, and I'm sure we'll do it again.
Sounds good.